Welcome back to Quick and Effective Environment Illustration. Here in Lesson 6, we're going to keep on refining these layer shapes. We've got the background refined to a pretty decent level. Middle ground 1 is looking pretty good, and now we're on middle ground 2, moving closer to the foreground, coming forward each step, one step at a time. We're now going to start refining this edge, detailing it out. This landscape down here is a wooded landscape, so we're going to see the tops of trees along the edge of this ridge. So I took a texture brush, set the size to fade, so you could treat it like a stroke, a brush with some paint on it, and it fades out and thins up as you drag that stroke along. Now you can adjust those settings to create the impression of a row of trees, or you can use different brushes. I'm going to use a few techniques here. See, for pine trees at a far distance, that's not a bad mark to make. And once you've come up with a way to make a mark like this, you've then got it in your toolkit for later when you're called upon to draw that particular thing again. If I need to draw trees from above in the distance, I know I can switch this brush, switch it to fade, and use this brush to quickly get that effect. Or I could use a number of different other brushes or other techniques that I've come up with. Here's a Scumbly texture brush. In this case, you're not putting down each tree with the brush stroke up, but we're laying the trees in as more of a mass, of more of a texture, side to side. So in order to keep this tree line looking organic and natural and having some interest, I'm not using the same technique across the whole space. You see, I'm using the Scumbly texture brush for a part, and then for a little accent, a little detail, using an actual paintbrush to actually paint in an individual tree here and there. Always painting in and cutting back out and getting the shape just right. Where if I was to just use, let's say a tree stamp brush that just, you set the spacing up and you stamped out a line of trees, it would look pretty graphic. It wouldn't work for this type of landscape image. Of course, if you're painting a much more graphic image, it works fine. And here, this ridge is further in the background, so there's less. There are fewer trees called out individually. There's less detail. It's a little looser and a little more textury. So I treat it that way to get that effect. Now, of course, these the land comes down to into the water a little bit. These aren't necessarily islands, but they're wooded as well, so we're going to keep cleaning up this shape and getting it just right. Painting in, carving out, using texture brush, using a hard brush. Now even using like a chisel brush. Keep switching it up to use a variety of technique to get a variety of line, to get a variety of shape. If you just use a hard edge round brush to do all this, to paint in and to erase out, you'll end up with a hard edged looking image. Where using a variety of brushes, a variety of strokes, you can get a much more looser, freer, a less labored over image and a less really a less digital, less graphic looking image. So this area is a lot of back and forth to get the right feel. And I'm zoomed up, here we're working at 100%, but I really make my judgments on whether or not these marks are working. I make these judgments by looking at the image in this thumbnail form, by looking at my second monitor, at my second window of this image that's open. Because in there you can see some of these marks are so small that they won't even show up in the final. They won't even show up when you take in the whole image as a whole. And that's why you don't want to get carried away detailing out so early in the picture. Because I could easily get lost right here and start painting in a tree line, and then another tree line in front, and another tree line in front, and starting to show light and shadow. But it's too soon for that. Because if you spend all that time putting all this detail in there, you might end up zooming out and seeing how small of a portion of the whole picture that corner of trees really is. So I'm just trying to focus on the outline still. Not the color, not the texture. Just refining this shape more and more. Now I'm trying to get it right, but like I said, not to get carried away with detail, but you do want to hit what you're trying to hit. I still want it to read as individual trees all along this ridge, all along that back ridge, all along this front ridge in front of the water. But I want it to give the impression of those trees. I don't want to have to draw each little tree in there. And I think this technique is working out. Because when I pull back, it's starting to read. It doesn't read like too much because it's still a big, flat, gray shape. But once we finish carving all this out correctly, getting just the right interest and the right variety, then we can start laying in the color and texture. Still just trying to refine this tree line. I think I'll finish up this lesson carving out this middle ground layer shape down here. Get the water as it comes forward into the foreground a little. So we'll wrap this lesson up, carving out these shapes, and I'll see you in the next lesson as we start to refine the foreground layer shape.